The cold wind of November whipped through the quiet streets of Briarwood, Connecticut, a seemingly idyllic town nestled away from the rush of city life. The houses here stood tall and pristine, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns and rows of trees that lined the avenues like silent sentinels. It was a picture-perfect neighborhood, the kind that seemed too good to be true. And in the case of Sophia Harrison, it was. Sophia, a 40-year-old housewife, had always been the epitome of grace and charm in Briarwood. To everyone who knew her, neighbors, friends, and even strangers, she was the ideal woman. She organized charity events, hosted neighborhood dinners, and helped with the children's activities at school. She was always at the heart of everything. On the surface, Sophia had everything: a beautiful home, a perfect family, a loving husband, Ethan Harrison, and 2 wonderful children. But beneath that flawless exterior, something was breaking. Her marriage to Ethan had been built on the foundation of love, but that foundation was slowly crumbling. Ethan, a successful businessman, had become consumed with his career. Long hours at the office, business trips that stretched for weeks, and a constant drive for success left him with little to offer at home. Sophia had once felt the thrill of their love, the warmth of his embrace, and the joy of being his partner. Now, the bed they once shared felt cold and empty, a mere reflection of the emotional distance that had grown between them. She had tried to reach out to him, to rekindle the spark that had once burned brightly. But every time she tried to talk to him, his tired eyes and distracted demeanor told her everything she needed to know: he was no longer interested. He didn't notice the sadness in her eyes, the longing in her heart. He didn't hear the silence that filled their home when the kids were away at school or visiting friends. Ethan had become a ghost, a man present in body but absent in spirit. As the chill of winter began to creep into the town, so too did the coldness in Sophia's life. She had become nothing more than a shadow in her own home, living for the occasional smile of a neighbor, the fleeting moments when she could pretend everything was fine. But deep down, she knew she was suffocating. One cold afternoon in December, after another lonely morning spent in the quiet house, Sophia decided to go for a walk. It was something she had done often in the past, to clear her mind, to escape the routine of her life. Her footsteps echoed along the empty streets as she walked past the rows of houses that all seemed to have the same perfect facade. She passed a few familiar faces, exchanged polite hellos, but no one knew the emptiness she was carrying inside. It was on one of these walks that she stumbled upon Luke Taylor, the young man who worked at the local coffee shop. Sophia had seen him many times, but never paid him much attention. He was just another young man, friendly and courteous, who made her coffee every morning. But today, something was different. Their brief interactions, casual exchanges about the weather or the day's events, felt strangely comforting. Luke's smile was warm, genuine, nothing like the distant smiles she received from Ethan anymore. He asked her how her day was, and for the first time in months, someone truly seemed to care. The conversation started innocuously, a simple exchange of pleasantries, but as they spoke more, Sophia felt something stir inside her. Luke's youthful energy and attentiveness felt like a breath of fresh air. The way he listened to her, really listened, made her feel seen in a way Ethan hadn't in years. She found herself coming back to the coffee shop more often, seeking out his company. What began as innocent small talk over lattes and cappuccinos soon turned into something deeper. Luke was always there, with his easygoing nature, his youthful charm. He made Sophia laugh again, a sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in months. He was different. And as the days grew colder, she found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. There was no grand decision. No moment when Sophia consciously chose to step out of her marriage. But with each passing encounter, she found herself needing the attention, the affection, the feeling of being desired. Ethan's indifference had pushed her into the arms of another. And the more she was with Luke, the more she realized just how much she had been missing. But as much as she welcomed the new connection, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind. What was she doing? Was this just an escape from her reality, a way to fill the void left by a distant husband? She knew the answer, but she wasn't ready to face it yet. Not today. Today, she would enjoy the thrill of something new, something exciting, something that made her feel alive again. Sophia's life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. And as she left the coffee shop that evening, the warmth of Luke's smile still lingering in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was about to fall apart. As the days in Briarwood grew shorter and the chill of winter settled deeper into the town, Sophia's unease within her own home grew alongside the ever-present emptiness in her marriage. The love she once shared with Ethan Harrison seemed like a distant memory, a fleeting warmth that had slowly been snuffed out by years of neglect and the weight of their separate lives. Ethan was a man driven by ambition, always chasing success, always consumed by his work. He had been a loving husband once, attentive and affectionate, but that was before his company expanded, before the late nights in the office and the constant travel became his reality. Now, it was rare for Sophia to see him without the cold, distant look in his eyes, a look that spoke volumes about how far they had drifted from each other. Sophia had tried to bridge the gap. She had suggested romantic dinners, weekends away to reignite their spark, but Ethan always had an excuse, a late meeting, an urgent call, or an early flight to another city. The man she had once admired, the man she had once built a life with, was now little more than a stranger in her own home. He would come home late, sit at the dinner table, eat in silence, and then retreat to his office or to bed, leaving her to clean up the remnants of their once vibrant relationship. Sophia didn't know how much longer she could bear it. She couldn't remember the last time Ethan had truly looked at her, not in the way he used to, when his eyes would soften, his lips would curl into a smile, and the world would fade away, leaving just the two of them. She missed that warmth. She missed the touch of his hand on her arm, the gentle words he used to speak to her, the way he'd say her name as though she was the only woman in the world. But those moments were gone, and in their place was an overwhelming loneliness. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had tried to make it work. She had been patient. She had given him time. But all that time had done was push them further apart. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. The walls, once filled with laughter and joy, now felt cold and oppressive. The silence between them became unbearable. Ethan's absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was a silent acceptance of the inevitable, the erosion of their connection, the death of their love. Sophia began to question herself. She wondered what had happened to her. How had she let it get this bad? Was it her fault that they had drifted so far apart? Was she not enough for Ethan anymore? The doubts crept in, gnawing at her insides. She had devoted so much of herself to him, to their family, and yet here she was, alone. The questions came with no answers, only the quiet ache of a heart that had been left behind. One evening in early January, after another lonely dinner, Sophia stood by the window, staring out at the snow falling gently over Briarwood. Ethan was out of town again, leaving her to face the house and the silence alone. She couldn't remember the last time he had called to check in, let alone told her he missed her. There was no warmth in their conversations anymore. Just routines, just empty exchanges. She had become used to the silence, but it hurt just the same. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Luke, the young barista from Café Local, the one who had begun to fill the spaces Ethan had left behind. His message was simple: how about a coffee tomorrow? I'll be here. For the briefest moment, a thrill shot through Sophia's chest. She felt a flutter in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't felt in so long. The attention, the flirtation, the simple gesture of someone caring, it was all so foreign, so intoxicating. It was the opposite of everything she had become accustomed to in her marriage. It was dangerous, she knew, but it was also a relief. A way to escape the suffocating loneliness that had consumed her. Sophia stared at the message for a long time, the cold weight of guilt pressing down on her. She had never imagined herself in this position. She had never thought she would seek comfort outside her marriage. But the reality of her life with Ethan had made her feel invisible. And Luke made her feel seen. He made her feel alive in a way that Ethan no longer did. With a deep sigh, Sophia typed back, "I'll be there." She set the phone down, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Was this a betrayal? She didn't know anymore. All she knew was that she couldn't keep living in this hollow shell of a marriage. She needed something more. She needed to feel important again. She needed to feel desired. As she prepared to leave the house the next morning, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her seemed unfamiliar, tired eyes, pale skin, a tightness around her lips that hadn't been there before. She hadn't realized how much the loneliness had affected her until now. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She wasn't the woman Ethan had fallen in love with. But was it too late to find herself again? Sophia shook the thought away. There was no time to dwell on it. Today, she would meet Luke. Today, she would escape. The door clicked shut behind her as she stepped out into the cold morning air. Her heart beat faster with each step, anticipation and guilt mixing together in a volatile cocktail. At that moment, the thought of Ethan, of their marriage, seemed like a distant memory, a shadow she was too tired to chase anymore. And with that, she walked away, ready to take the first step into an uncertain, dangerous world. Sophia stepped into Café Local the next morning, the familiar warmth of the shop immediately enveloping her. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive silence she had left behind in her home. As soon as the door closed behind her, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. Here, she was just a woman in search of a quiet moment, away from the expectations and the weight of her reality. And there he was, Luke Taylor, standing behind the counter as always, his bright smile lighting up the room. The same easygoing charm that had drawn her in so many weeks ago was now directed straight at her. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting up in recognition, and for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten, excitement. It was as if, in his gaze, she wasn't just Sophia Harrison, the housewife, the mother, the dutiful wife of Ethan. She was Sophia, a woman who deserved attention, affection, and, for just a moment, freedom. "Morning, Sophia," Luke greeted her, his voice warm, inviting. "I was hoping you'd come by today." Sophia smiled, a little too brightly, trying to mask the nervousness she felt deep down. "I wouldn't miss it." She walked up to the counter, and Luke made her coffee, just the way she liked it, 2 shots of espresso, a dash of milk, and a swirl of caramel. As he prepared it, their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the world around her seemed to fade away. She wasn't sure what it was about Luke, his youthful energy, the way he genuinely seemed to care, or the simple fact that he was there for her when Ethan wasn't. All she knew was that this small act of kindness, this simple exchange, was enough to make her feel alive again. "Here you go," Luke said, handing her the cup with a smile. "Just like you like it. Sit down, I'll be right with you." Sophia took the cup, the warmth spreading through her fingers as she found a seat by the window. She sipped the coffee slowly, savoring the sweetness and the sense of peace that came with it. For a brief moment, it felt like she was just another woman in a cafe, nothing more, nothing less. But she knew better. She knew what was brewing between her and Luke wasn't just about coffee. As she sat there, the minutes stretched, and a quiet anticipation settled in. Luke was busy with other customers, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. She didn't know how long she could keep pretending that everything was fine at home, pretending that the life she was living wasn't slowly suffocating her. Luke came over to her table, his easy grin still in place. "So, how's everything going?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. It was a bold move, one that made her heart race a little. She had been expecting small talk, maybe even some polite distance, but his openness caught her off guard. "Same as always," Sophia replied, her voice soft but steady. "Busy, you know. Kids, house, Ethan." She tried to sound nonchalant, but the words felt hollow coming out of her mouth. Luke leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made Sophia's pulse quicken. "You don't look like you're busy. You look like you're running on empty." Her breath hitched, and she instinctively looked away, uncomfortable with the truth in his words. The vulnerability he seemed to see in her was something she had been hiding for months, perhaps even years. She had spent so long playing the role of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen. "I'm not," she said quietly, her voice tinged with an honesty she hadn't intended. "I'm just tired." Luke studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then, without a word, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The simple touch sent a shiver through her, the warmth of his hand in stark contrast to the cold emptiness she felt at home. It was a gesture of comfort, but to Sophia, it was something more. It was an invitation, an unspoken promise of something she had been missing. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself feel the connection, even if it was fleeting, even if it was dangerous. For the first time in so long, someone was paying attention to her, truly paying attention. Ethan never saw her like this anymore. He never noticed the cracks in their marriage, the loneliness that crept into every corner of their home. But Luke, with his youthful intensity and fresh perspective, saw her clearly. "Is that why you've been coming here?" Luke asked softly, his thumb gently brushing against her hand. "Because you're looking for something more?" Sophia looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she could see that he understood, perhaps more than anyone else ever had. She wasn't just looking for coffee. She was looking for a reason to feel something again. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm just trying to feel something real." There was no turning back now. The line between what was right and what was wrong had blurred, and in this small cafe, with Luke's hand still holding hers, Sophia knew that her life was about to change forever. The moment stretched on, thick with tension and possibility. Luke's fingers tightened around hers, his touch lingering just a little longer than it should have. And for the first time in months, Sophia didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like she was just a housewife, a mother, a role to be played. For the first time in a long time, she felt like a woman. As she pulled her hand away slowly, her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of excitement and guilt rising within her. She wasn't sure where this was going. She wasn't sure how far she was willing to let this go. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: Luke had awakened something inside her that had long been dormant. And she wasn't ready to let it go. "Thank you for this," she said softly, standing up from the table. "For listening. For seeing me." Luke stood as well, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Anytime, Sophia. Anytime." She walked out of the cafe with her heart in her throat, the warmth of the coffee long gone, replaced by something much more intoxicating: desire, uncertainty, and the undeniable pull of something forbidden. And with each step, she felt herself slipping further away from the life she had once known. As the winter months deepened, so did the emotional distance between Sophia and Ethan. The cold winds that whipped through Briarwood seemed to mirror the chill that had settled between them. Ethan was still absent, consumed by work, and Sophia's attempts to reach him had grown more desperate and increasingly futile. She found herself at a crossroads, trapped in a marriage that no longer felt like hers, yet unable to fully let go. The familiar comfort of Luke's attention was enough to sustain her for a while, but it wasn't enough to fill the void. She needed more. She needed excitement. And that's when she met Max Carter. Sophia had never expected her life to take this turn. She had always considered herself a devoted wife and mother, her loyalty to Ethan unquestionable. But something inside her had snapped. She was tired of being invisible, of being ignored. And when she walked into Fitcore Gym that fateful January evening, she had no idea how one brief encounter would change everything. Max was the epitome of confidence and strength. Tall, athletic, with a chiseled physique that seemed to belong more to a fitness model than a personal trainer, Max commanded attention the moment he entered a room. When Sophia had signed up for a personal training session to try and keep her mind occupied, she hadn't anticipated the magnetic pull this man would have on her. He was different from Luke. Luke was youthful and playful, a breath of fresh air, offering her the attention and affection she had been starving for. But Max was something else entirely. He was a force. He was confident in a way that demanded respect, and that same confidence radiated into every interaction he had with her. Their first session was casual enough, Max showing her some light stretches and exercises, offering tips on her form, all the while giving her his undivided attention. It was when they moved on to a more intense workout, his hands guiding her through each motion, that Sophia began to feel something stirring inside her, something dangerous, yet thrilling. The touch of his hands, the intensity of his gaze, made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt in years. Max was unrelenting. His every instruction was firm, yet kind, his tone a blend of encouragement and control. There was no room for doubt or hesitation in his presence. With each passing moment, Sophia felt herself drawn to him, not just physically, but emotionally, too. He made her feel powerful, desired, and alive. Over the course of several weeks, their sessions became more intense, both physically and emotionally. Max wasn't just her trainer anymore, he was her escape. He noticed her subtle shifts in behavior, the way she hesitated when talking about her marriage, the way she clung to the moments they shared in the gym, as if they were the only real part of her life anymore. He was perceptive, and Sophia found herself looking forward to their workouts with an intensity that shocked her. It was during a late-night session in February that everything changed. The gym was empty, save for the two of them. Max had pushed her harder than ever before, and she was drenched in sweat, breathing heavily from the exertion. He handed her a towel, his hand lingering just a moment too long as he wiped the sweat from her brow. His fingers grazed her skin, and for a brief second, Sophia was lost in the sensation. "You're doing great," Max said, his voice low and steady, his eyes locking onto hers. There was an unspoken challenge in his gaze, one that Sophia couldn't resist. Before she could think, she was leaning into him. The kiss was sudden, urgent, almost like it had been building between them for weeks. Max didn't pull away. In fact, he deepened the kiss, his hands gripping her waist as if he had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. There was no turning back now. Sophia's pulse was racing. Her head was spinning, and for a moment, she forgot everything. She forgot Ethan, her marriage, the guilt that had been gnawing at her soul. In that moment, it was just her and Max, two people who had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They didn't speak much after that night. Their actions were enough to speak for them. The gym became their secret meeting place. Every session was an intense mix of physical exertion and quiet intimacy, stolen moments of passion amidst the sweat and exertion. Sophia found herself addicted to the feeling of Max's touch, his dominance, the way he made her feel desired in a way she had never known before. The contrast between Max and Luke was stark. Luke gave her warmth, affection, and escape from her lonely life, but Max gave her power. He made her feel alive in a way that no one had for years. She was no longer just a housewife or a mother. With Max, she was someone else. Someone more. Someone wanted. And that was enough to drown out the whispers of guilt and the cracks in her marriage. But it was also dangerous. As the weeks passed, Sophia couldn't help but notice how possessive Max had become. He started making demands, asking when she would be free, when they could meet again. His grip on her tightened, and she found herself caught between the thrill of his attention and the growing fear that she was losing herself in a world of deceit. One night, Max took her hand and pulled her close, his breath warm on her neck. "I want all of you, Sophia," he whispered, his voice thick with desire. "No more hiding, no more excuses. Just you and me." Sophia's heart raced, but something inside her hesitated. She wasn't sure what she was willing to risk anymore. She had crossed so many lines already, but she wasn't sure how much further she could go. Still, in that moment, as Max's lips brushed against her ear, Sophia found herself caught in the magnetic pull of his presence, knowing that with each encounter, she was stepping deeper into a web of lies and betrayal, a web she wasn't sure she could escape. Sophia's life had become a balancing act, an intricate dance between the roles of loving wife and mother, and the secret lover caught in the thrall of forbidden desire. Each day was a tightrope walk, each step calculated, each lie woven into the fabric of her increasingly complex existence. She had once been the picture of the perfect housewife, her days filled with school runs, grocery shopping, and tending to the needs of her family. Now, every moment felt like a lie, every action a step further down a path she couldn't return from. Her marriage to Ethan Harrison had long since become a facade, a polite agreement between two people who no longer truly saw each other. Ethan was still absent, physically and emotionally, lost in his work, more invested in the empire he had built than in the woman who had once stood by his side. Sophia's longing for connection had driven her to Luke, then to Max, but each time she found herself drawn deeper into a life she knew she couldn't sustain. By day, Sophia was the devoted wife, preparing meals, running errands, attending PTA meetings. Ethan would come home in the evenings, too tired to speak more than a few words, and they would sit across from each other at dinner, their conversation small and strained. She could sense the distance between them widening with each passing day, and the more he withdrew, the more she clung to the excitement of her secret life. By night, Sophia transformed into someone else. She would slip away under the guise of late-night errands or girls' nights out, but it wasn't friends or shopping she was meeting. It was Luke for coffee, Max for private sessions at the gym. The secrecy became second nature. She learned to time her meetings perfectly, slipping out when Ethan was busy, slipping back into her life just in time to avoid suspicion. The thrill of the lies became addictive. The feeling of having two separate worlds, one where she was a respected wife and mother, the other where she was desired, powerful, and free, was intoxicating. She felt like she was finally living, no longer just existing. But with each passing day, the strain of maintaining her dual existence began to take its toll. The lies were mounting, and she found herself constantly on edge, fearful of slipping up, of one world crashing into the other. It wasn't just the fear of Ethan discovering the truth that plagued her. It was the tension between Luke and Max that began to gnaw at her. Both men were becoming more possessive, more demanding. Luke, sweet and eager to please, had started to ask more questions. Where had she been? Why couldn't she spend more time with him? He wanted to know more about her life, about her marriage. Max, on the other hand, had become more intense, his hands lingering a little too long on her body after each training session. He didn't want her to just be a fleeting affair. He wanted her all to himself, and the demands he placed on her were growing heavier with each encounter. One evening, after another cold dinner with Ethan, Sophia found herself standing in the quiet of her kitchen, staring out the window at the snow falling gently outside. She had just returned from the gym, where Max had all but demanded that she choose him over Luke. He didn't want to share her, and the ultimatum he had given her had left her shaken. As she sipped her glass of wine, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Luke. "I miss you. When can we meet again?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Her pulse quickened. She had told herself that she needed to slow things down with Luke, he was getting too attached, and the guilt of it all was beginning to overwhelm her. But she couldn't ignore the way he made her feel. The way he saw her. The way he made her believe she could still be more than just a wife. As she typed a quick reply, promising to meet the next day, a strange sense of dread washed over her. This was getting out of hand. She was walking a tightrope, and the longer she kept up the charade, the more likely it was that everything would come crashing down. The next day, Luke's message was waiting for her when she woke up. "Can't wait to see you today. I've been thinking about you all night." Sophia stared at the screen for a long time, torn between the excitement she felt and the heavy weight of her guilt. She had promised Max that she would choose him, but her heart still ached for Luke. What would she do? Who would she choose? At that moment, a sudden realization struck her: she had no control over her own life anymore. She had become someone she didn't recognize. Someone willing to sacrifice everything for a fleeting moment of excitement, of feeling alive. She was losing herself in the web of lies, and she knew she couldn't keep pretending forever. But as the day wore on, and she found herself walking through the quiet streets of Briarwood toward Café Local, where Luke was waiting for her, her heart raced with anticipation. She was drawn to him, to the easy charm he offered, to the way he made her feel seen. For a moment, she convinced herself that it would all be fine. That she could keep balancing both worlds. That nothing would ever truly change. But deep down, she knew better. The tension between Luke and Max was only going to escalate. Ethan was starting to notice her distance, and the cracks in their marriage were beginning to show. The walls she had carefully built around her double life were closing in, and she was running out of time. Sophia walked into the cafe, her thoughts swirling in a storm of confusion and desire. Luke was already there, smiling up at her. But as she sat down, the weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her chest. The choices she had made had brought her to this point, this dangerous point where she was no longer sure what would come next. And as the door closed behind her, Sophia knew that her double life, the fragile balance she had worked so hard to maintain, was about to crumble. The question was, which world would she choose? Or would it choose her? The cold of late February had settled into Briarwood, its grip tightening around the town as though it too was waiting for something, anticipating the inevitable. Sophia had always loved winter in Connecticut, the snow blanketing the streets, the quiet that came with it. But now, as the world outside seemed frozen in place, so too did her life, paralyzed by the secrets she had spent so long trying to keep hidden. She had been living in a constant state of fear, knowing that sooner or later, her double life would collide with reality. What she hadn't anticipated was how violently that collision would come. It all started one fateful evening. Sophia had just finished a late session at Fitcore Gym with Max, his touch lingering a little too long as he adjusted her form, his eyes searing into hers. The intensity between them had been growing for weeks. Max no longer seemed satisfied with their secret meetings, he wanted more. He wanted all of her. That night, after the usual back and forth of flirtation and passion that had become their routine, Max had been uncharacteristically possessive. "I can't keep doing this, Sophia," he'd said, his voice low, almost threatening. "I'm tired of sharing you. I want all of you. No more hiding, no more games. You choose, me or him." The ultimatum had shaken her, the weight of his words sinking in deeper than she was willing to admit. She had promised Max that she would make a choice, but that promise had been a lie. She couldn't let go of Luke, who had given her the attention and affection Ethan had long since stopped providing. But Max, with his raw desire and intense presence, was not someone she could easily walk away from. As she left the gym, her mind was racing, a storm of guilt and fear clouding her thoughts. She had never been good at making decisions, especially not ones that could shatter her already fragile world. She was already in too deep, and every choice she made now seemed to be leading her further into darkness. She had planned to meet Luke later that night. It was their usual spot, Café Local, where they had shared so many stolen moments, so many quiet conversations that had become the only solace in her increasingly chaotic life. But that evening, when she arrived, she found herself feeling a deep unease, her body tense as she pushed open the door. Luke was already sitting at their usual table, a cup of coffee in front of him, but his expression was unreadable. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft but with a hint of concern. Sophia hesitated, sitting down across from him. She could feel the weight of her double life pressing down on her, the guilt eating away at her from the inside. The conversation she had been avoiding with him was now impossible to ignore. She had promised Max that she would choose, but she didn't know how to explain that to Luke without losing him. Before she could speak, the door swung open abruptly. Sophia froze as Max stormed into the cafe, his eyes wild with fury. He had followed her here, he must have. He was breathing heavily, his jaw clenched, and as he approached the table, his gaze locked onto Luke with an intensity that made the air feel thick with tension. "What the hell is this?" Max snarled, his voice a low growl. "You think you can play me for a fool, Sophia?" Luke stood up quickly, his hands raised in defense, but Max was already in his face, the anger radiating off him like an inferno. "You're nothing but a game to her," Max spat, his hands balling into fists. "And you," he turned to Sophia, his eyes blazing, "you've been lying to both of us." The cafe, usually a sanctuary for Sophia, now felt suffocating. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything she had tried so hard to keep secret was unraveling right before her eyes. Max and Luke were both angry, both demanding her attention, both pulling her in different directions, and the pressure was suffocating. "I didn't want this," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt either of you." But the words felt hollow, too little, too late. Max's rage grew uncontrollable. "You think you can just walk away from me? You think I'm going to let you slip away into another man's arms?" His fist slammed onto the table, shaking the coffee cups, and in that instant, the situation escalated beyond control. Luke stepped forward, his body tense, clearly ready to defend himself, but he was no match for Max's fury. The two men collided, their anger exploding in a blur of fists and shouting. The noise was deafening, echoing throughout the small cafe, but it wasn't until Max shoved Luke violently against a table that everything went silent. Sophia screamed, rushing forward to try and separate them, but it was too late. In the chaos of the struggle, Max's hand found a sharp object on the table, a knife, left unnoticed in the rush. He swung it blindly, and in the next instant, Luke staggered back, clutching his side as a pool of blood began to spread across the floor. Sophia's heart stopped as she watched Luke fall to the ground, gasping for breath, his hand trembling as it pressed against the wound. Max stood frozen, the knife still in his hand, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. For a moment, there was no sound, just the heavy, suffocating silence that filled the room. Luke's eyes met Sophia's, a plea for help in them, but she could do nothing. She was paralyzed with fear, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Max had crossed a line, and in doing so, he had shattered everything. "Max," she whispered, horrified. "What have you done?" Max stared at her, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. "I didn't mean," his voice trailed off, but his words held no meaning anymore. The damage had been done. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they neared. The reality of what had just unfolded crashed down on Sophia. Luke was dying. Max was standing over him, a killer, his rage fading into shock. And her entire world, her family, her marriage, her carefully constructed life, was crumbling around her. As the police arrived and the chaos ensued, Sophia realized that there was no going back. Her actions had led her here, to this moment of irreversible loss. The death of Luke was the final consequence of her choices, the moment when her lies could no longer protect her. And as she was led away, her heart heavy with guilt, the weight of everything she had done crushed her. There was no escaping the consequences of her double life. Everything she had worked so hard to hide was now exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath of Luke's death was swift and brutal. The police arrived minutes after the altercation, their sirens cutting through the stillness of the night, a stark reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. Sophia stood frozen in the doorway of Café Local, her eyes locked on the lifeless body of Luke, blood pooling around him, a scene she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. Max, who had once been the embodiment of control and confidence, now stood trembling, his body in shock as the weight of his actions sank in. Sophia felt her chest tighten, as though the world had contracted around her. Every breath felt like a struggle, every heartbeat like an unbearable reminder of how far she had fallen. In the chaos, her mind was a blur. She had spent so long running from the truth, from the emptiness inside her marriage, that she never once considered the dangers of living a double life. But now, everything she had kept hidden, her affairs, her lies, her choices, was exposed in the most horrific way imaginable. Max was arrested, his face a mask of disbelief and regret, though the damage was irreversible. As the police handcuffed him and led him away, he looked at Sophia, his eyes filled with something between remorse and anger. But it was too late for apologies. It was too late for redemption. There was no excuse for what had happened. Sophia was left in a daze, the weight of everything pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. As the hours passed, she was questioned by the police, her words feeling hollow and disconnected from reality. They asked her about the events leading up to the fight, about her relationship with both men, but it all seemed surreal. How had things spiraled so out of control? How had she allowed herself to get here? Her marriage to Ethan was now a distant memory. He was still away on another business trip, his absence a cruel reminder that he had never truly seen her, never understood the depth of her loneliness. And now, with Luke dead and Max in custody, there was no way back. There was no way to repair the damage she had done to herself, to her family, to everyone who had ever trusted her. When the police finally left, Sophia was alone in the silence of her empty home. The weight of guilt and regret settled over her like a heavy fog. She had destroyed everything she had ever held dear, all in pursuit of something fleeting, something that seemed so necessary at the time but was now revealed for what it truly was, a dangerous illusion. She had wanted to escape her marriage, to feel desired, to be seen as more than just a wife and mother. But in doing so, she had lost herself entirely. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Ethan, who was unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in their lives. "I'll be home in a couple of days. Can't wait to see you." The words, once comforting, now felt like a cruel mockery of the life she had destroyed. The thought of facing him, of trying to explain what had happened, what she had done, was unbearable. How could she face him now? How could she look him in the eye and tell him the truth? Her world had shattered, and she was left holding the pieces. Days passed, but nothing felt real. The shock of Luke's death, the arrest of Max, and the crumbling of her marriage were too much to process. Sophia had spent so long running away from the truth that now, when it had finally caught up to her, she was paralyzed by the consequences. She had been the architect of her own destruction, building a life of deceit that had finally collapsed under its own weight. As she sat in the silence of her home, the reality of what she had lost began to sink in. Her reputation, her family, her future, all gone. The guilt gnawed at her constantly, but there was no escaping it now. The choices she had made had led to this moment, and there was no way to undo the damage. She had crossed lines she couldn't uncross, betrayed everyone who had ever cared about her. And in the end, she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. It was a lesson she had learned too late, and one she would never forget. What do you think about Sophia's story? Was it fate that led her to make the choices she did, or were there warning signs along the way that she ignored? How far would you go to escape your problems, and what would you do if you were in her shoes? Leave a comment and share your thoughts with us below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think will happen to Sophia now? Will she ever be able to rebuild her life, or has it already been irreparably shattered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.